Hello and welcome to the View from Cybus 2020, which is being held virtually this year for the first time ever. I'm Joy McKnight, Managing Editor of The Banker, and I'm joined via video link with Victoria Cleland, who is Executive Director of Banking, Payments and Innovation at the Bank of England, to talk about domestic and cross-border payments. Victoria, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me, Joy.
So how has the COVID-19 pandemic really impacted payments in the UK?
I mean, the pandemic has had an absolutely profound impact on everyone's lives in numerous ways, and just the fact that you and I are talking down the line rather than face to face. And I think in addition to the sort of really appalling sort of health implications and far more death than anyone would have ever thought, it's really impacted the way that people work, how we shop, how we socialise, and all that has had a sort of knock-on impact into payments. I think we're still in the pandemic, so it's hard to have too many lessons learned. I think one of the key things I've really noticed and am really pleased with is how resilient and flexible the payment systems have been and how supportive they've been of the changing patterns of payments that the public are making. I think that during the lockdown period globally, people have been more and more reliant on payments. They've been an absolute must-have. So I'm glad the systems met that challenge, even though people are working from home. And I think the payments have been an interesting insight into how the economy's been working. So early in lockdown, we saw a reduction in sort of economic activity, and that was coming through very clearly in payment data, seeing reductions in volumes and values. People just couldn't go out and spend or order as much online as they'd wanted to. In CHAPS, the UK sort of wholesale payment scheme, we saw a fairly significant reduction in volumes, but we did see an increase in values, which was driven by sort of activity in the financial market. So I think the payments lens was a very interesting one to look through.
And it's also an interesting time because the Bank of England is starting to replace the real-time gross settlement system. How important is ISO 22, which is a standard, how important is that to the revamped RTGS system?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely integral to the system. As you say, we're renewing the real-time gross settlement system. We did at the start of lockdown sort of stop and think, with so much going on, the Bank of England needs to respond to a lot of things. Should we keep pushing ahead? And thought it is such an important program for us, and the industry will push ahead. ISO is the messaging system. It's really going to be at the heart of the new RTGS. It's almost the language that it speaks. It's how the messages are going to work between the system and our direct participants, reserve account holders, other payment systems. And it's going to give the industry a lot more information. It's going to be information in a much easier to digest format, and that's going to help with things like AML, but also understanding customers more, understanding their own data, understanding their own liquidity position. So I think that's going to be really key. But also a real benefit of moving to ISO 20022 is the harmonisation we're going to get across the world, and this is going to be really important for some of the work that I've also been looking at during busy lockdown times in relation to cross-border payment systems. So if we're all using common messaging standard, it'll be much easier to be moving money from one country to another.
Excellent. Well, that was going to be my last question, because obviously you're the chair of the CPMI task force on cross-border payments, and they've just come out with a report. You know, what needs to be in place in order to improve cross-border payments as identified in the report?
Yeah, so the report is part of a G20 initiative. So I think people have been trying to solve the cross-border payment conundrum for many years, if not decades. They're typically seen as much more sort of costly, slower, less transparent, and sometimes less easy to access than domestic payments. And we want to try and solve that. And I think one of the things that the task force was doing was to try and look at it holistically. So not just seeing it as a payment system issue or an AML issue, or we need a blank sheet of paper issue, but trying to look at a whole range of different options. And so the report that we published in July set out 19 building blocks to enhance cross-border payments and to really address these challenges, and it splits the work into what we call 5 focus areas. The first one is about public and private sector commitment to really make a difference here, to get an understanding of what good looks like. The second is around regulatory, supervisory and oversight frameworks, trying to get greater, not quite consistency, but greater understanding in how they can work together properly. Changes to the existing payment infrastructures is another one. Another focus area is about data and market practices. And then the 5th one is the more exploratory, forward-looking about sort of new payment infrastructures. So if central bank issue digital currencies take off domestically, what would need to be done to make those work cross-border? Same with stable coins, or should we have a completely new type of system? So there are a number of different building blocks, as we call that. And in the next few weeks, we should be launching the roadmap, which is a piece of work led by the Financial Stability Board that Sika and I have been feeding a lot, trying to think about, okay, we've got our 19 building blocks, but how do we make that a reality? Who needs to be taking these different issues forward? What sort of sequencing do we need to think about? And what is the indicative timetable, particularly for some of those earlier actions? So it's a really exciting programme of work, and it's one where it needs to be a really strong collaboration with the public sector and the private sector if we're going to make a difference in this really important area.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your insights, Victoria.